But then there was a bit of a derailment.
Yes.
Known as, out of the blue, you, of all people, and what's your age now?
I'm 46.
46, age 45 or 46, you suffered a major stroke.
Yeah. It came out of nowhere. It's so surreal how much that has affected me, and I'm really grateful to be as cognitively myself as I am, and to have recovered as well. I definitely still feel issues from it, especially when I get tired. But it's, even in this interview, I've had to pick quickly. Thankfully, it's happening quicker now, but I have to pick an alternative word than what I would have said because I can't get the word out. So I've gotten to the point where I'm definitely, I think, where people aren't noticing, but it's so much more effort the best way I can describe it is it's so much more effort for me to communicate and be me than it used to be. Inside, it's all there. But what happens when you're tired is that it's just everything that starts coming back. You start struggling to find the words. You start stumbling. You can get a little confused, but it's not detrimental. It just exists. It takes very little rest to just get yourself back. I'm still experiencing that. We've been playing shows and it's getting better, but still there are times after shows, performances that I still struggle. And it just, and other times,
plus you're a guy who has all kinds of things you want to do at any given time, and you're good at so many of them. You have Jesse Townley or Jello Biafra syndrome of trying to do too many things at once, and that helps. It helps drain you. But do you think having not one but two bands and still being a graphic designer, a comic book artist, and whatnot is helping bring the full Dominic back because you're doing so much?
Yes, I definitely immediately, I realized that when I was when I was in the hospital bed afterwards, it really I realized just how close I came to dying and to worse, not being completely there. And the taste I got of what it was like to listen to people talk to me and not quite understand them, and then not be able to smoothly communicate backwards was very profound. I knew that there was never a moment where I thought that I wasn't going to do everything I could to bring myself back. And I have pushed the boundaries all the way along, testing how far I could push myself. And then when I can't go any further, I definitely rest. There's times I've hit walls many times, and there's times that people around me have been very worried about how hard I'm pushing. But even they recognize that what I've been doing, and even still all this time later, I'm still doing it, is pushing it as far as I can so that I can expand and get back as much as I can. Like for a while, it was hard to read, and I would sit down with a book and I'd read paragraphs over and over again until I got them, and then moved on to the next one. And now I can read again. And it all became very challenging. I still run into issues with numbers, sometimes switching them. Now it's a lot of small little things that that definitely test one's patience. Like you doubt everything you're doing and you have to check it like 100 times because you will literally see things wrong. I'll interpret things wrong a lot more than I ever did before. But that said, even if I'm like this for the rest of my life, I'll take it over what could have been the alternative. But it definitely hurt me. I definitely,
as I suggested, the more you say you're going to tell people you're going to do stuff and whatnot, write everything down. Especially when you're going to get another text a minute later and another call from somebody else, and zig and zag and zig and zag. But meanwhile, the most beneficial thing we can do here, of course, it's going through a lot of listeners' heads right now, I suspect, is, oh my God, this could happen to me at any time. Even kids get strokes sometimes. So the fact that it can happen to anybody, including maybe even especially me with the heart weirdness we're trying to keep from causing strokes and stuff. It's mild, but you gotta be on it. How do you know or detect if you think you might be having a stroke? I have no idea, or had no idea before I talked to you. So this is where we need the crash course.
Well, it's funny because I didn't know either.
Of course.
Like, thankfully, my girlfriend, Valerie Ott, knew what was happening and was able to figure it out in time. But I mean, mine was also very obvious.
But what did you first feel? What did you first feel internally or in your head? You were at the beach or something. Were you at Stinson Beach?
We went to this place called Stinson Beach, which is in Northern California, just about 45 minutes north of San Francisco.
Oh yeah, a lot of people know where it is. Yeah, Highway 1 right before the turnoff for Bolinas.
And I remember that her and I are standing there, and she's finding out just how cold Northern California waters can be in April. And then we saw a crab shell, like a molted crab, like it molted and shed its extra shell, and it's rolling in the water. And I was like, oh my God, this is a whole crab shell. Like an entire impression of a crab that is no longer there. It's just there, the outer shell that it molted. And I pointed and I was about to say, oh, hey, look at that. And I got out, and then all of a sudden, no pain, but I couldn't say anything. All I could say was like, and it was the most...
And your eyesight was okay.
Everything was fine at first. I was like, and I kept like trying to say the word crab shell, crab. And I just, and I couldn't get anything out. Meanwhile, she kind of saw with my gesture. So she's like, oh, wow. And she like looked at it and like took a picture of it, I think. And then turned to me and she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, I kept holding up my finger. I was like, 1 second, because it felt like if I could just take a breath, I could obviously talk, but then I'd take the breath and I couldn't say anything. And I think she asked me at the time, it's like, are you having a stroke? I didn't know what a stroke, I didn't know what it felt like. And I shook my head, and she says that's kind of funny that she asked me what it was, because why would I know? But she said that at this point I was drooling, because I think I was already starting to experience the paralyzation of my right side. So getting the face droop.
Oh my.
And it was unlike any feeling I have ever had, because it doesn't make sense to not be able to speak. And it felt like almost like, I even had the thought of like, well, it's almost like one of those horror movies. Like you just can't, well, he's like, somebody says, no more talking. And you're just like, or their mouth is gone. So like, she was like, hey, let's go sit down. So she brought me back to where our towels were, and we had a beach tent, and like, I'm sitting there. And I put my shirt back on, and I'm like, and she's like, you got to talk to me, or I have to do something here. And I grabbed my phone, and I was going to text her, and I went to unlock my phone, and it didn't recognize my face, which now I realize it was because it was drooping so much. And then I started typing my code in, and I couldn't remember it. It was gone. Like I just had no memory of my passcode. And I just looked at it and I dropped it. I just set it down and I looked at her and I went, and she's like, that's it. And so she called 911 and gestured to another camper to go get help, another beach, somebody on another towel to run and get lifeguards. And they came in and they came in really fast, and they started talking to her, and she's like, I think he's having a stroke. And they tried to get me to talk. I couldn't. They tried to get me to follow their finger with my eyes. And I did notice my head had to like turn. I was having trouble focusing on it. And I was like, okay. And in my head, I'm like, no pain, but I'm just like, this is really weird. I don't know why I can't talk. So they told me to like raise my arms. And then that moment I raised both arms, but all of a sudden my right arm felt sluggish, and I had to fight to get it up. And I was like, whoa, what's that? And they're like, okay. So they put me on a gurney. They're like, I think you're having a stroke. And I was like, okay. And it was just sort of panicky. Like it felt all like a whirlwind, where there were all these lifeguards, and they were talking, and they got called ahead, and she had called 911. And I guess a bunch of people got all of our stuff together and helped her get her stuff together, and they put me on a little like pickup sand go-kart pickup.
Right.
I was on the
Right.
back of something, and they drove me down to where these firemen EMTs were, and near the firehouse on the section of beach that's cordoned off, and they started trying to talk to me, and a nurse came up, and I heard a helicopter show up, and they had decided to take me to Mills Peninsula and Burlingame in the South Bay because they had the best stroke ward, they felt. And so I got put on a helicopter, and this whole time I'm not in pain, and everyone's telling me you're going to be okay, and I'm like, I'm going to be okay. I believe it. I don't know what's happening. But while I was in the helicopter, they're putting on the IV. It's kind of like an ambulance, and I'm just sitting there. One, I'm like, wow, I'm on a helicopter. This is crazy. And the other part, I'm like, man, there's no way I'm getting out of this without getting stuck with a whole lot of needles. That's also what I thought. I was like, I'm going to turn into a pincushion for this. There's no way out of it.
Right.
But I thought, okay, seriously, focus. You can talk. You got to talk. And I was like, just say your name. And I was like, okay. It took so much effort, and I was able to finally say, my name is Dominic. I was like, but the helicopter's really loud. Nobody can hear me. It's just me. I have headphones on. I'm like, my name is Dominic. And then I was like, good. Okay. Now say your last name. And I was like, I don't remember my last name. I was like, okay, that's bad. And I remember in the helicopter going, okay, that's bad. It felt like certain parts of my brain were just shutting down, and like I couldn't access certain things, and I couldn't remember certain things. All of a sudden it was all fuzzy. It felt.
Did you try to work your extremities to make sure they were still there or not?
Yeah, I did. I kept trying to check stuff, and my hand was like, I just kept moving it, and I was like, come on, come back. And I was like, okay, I don't remember my name, but if I just say it, I've said it my whole life. If I just say it, I'll get it right. So just say it. And whatever you say, it's going to be right. And I was like, my name is Dominic Davi. And I was like, Davi, there it is. Got it. Okay, I know that's my name. And I was just like, okay, that's definitely not good. So that was my first, like, okay, I know the not speaking thing is weird, but that's got to be something weird. I don't know what's happening there. But then when I couldn't remember my name, I was like, okay, there's some problems. They brought me to we landed at Burlingame, and they were really on top of stuff. A doctor came up and was like, okay, Mr. Davi, we suspect you are having a stroke. We're going to take you into a CT scan. We're going to take a look, and we're going to see, and we're going to go from there, right? And I was like, I couldn't say anything. And they brought me into a CT scan, and then they brought me into the emergency room, wherever I was. And after that, and they said, okay, you have a very large
clot.
Yeah, clot. See, that's how I was struggling. You have a very large clot. We could operate, but we think that it would be best to do a clot buster drug. But we have to warn you, sir, that there's a chance that you could suffer massive cranial bleeding. And I was like, I remember being lying there going, I couldn't say anything, but I was like, okay. And they're like, so we think that this is best. And I was like, I mean, it can't get worse.
Did they tell you how far inside the brain it actually was?
It was up in my left side.
Okay.
Over here. They were fast. I was under that CT scan in 45 minutes, and it was only another 15 minutes. Under an hour to get to me, start to finish. So it was really amazing, because if I'd have been on my own, I don't know what I would have done, because I would have been not able to speak to somebody. So picture in your head, you're walking down the street, or you're near a bunch of offices, if I was at AT, and then I come out and I'm looking at you going, and I can't dial, and I can't talk. I mean, it could have been so much worse than it was. So I'm so grateful for Valerie recognizing it. I ended up getting the call.
We all are. She
and the lifeguards
took action and knew to do that right away.
I think that's something that's very significant to remember is that sometimes it's hard to accept that a disaster is happening, and recognizing how, like, we always want to downplay. We always want to say, like, it'll be okay. Just take a moment. We'll take a moment. But with a stroke, time's of the essence. So one thing I learned, it's super cheesy. I'm going to warn everybody right now. It's very cheesy, but they told me, be fast. That an acronym. B is for balance. Is the person are they able to keep themselves balanced? I was starting to struggle to walk. Then it's E for eyes. Is their vision blurry? That really didn't happen to me, but I guess I did have a hard time when somebody put their finger up and had me follow it with just my eyes. I was turning my head. I was trying to focus on it. Right. So that's when I noticed that. I didn't notice it right away. F, and now we're in fast. F is face, the drooling and then the sagging of my face. It wasn't super visual at first, but it was becoming clear. Like, I don't think it looked really awful, but I think it was subtle, but it was happening. Because you lose the muscle control in your face, and you don't realize how much it's held up there until it's not holding it up.
Right.
The next one is arms. A for arms. You have the person or yourself hold both arms up, and if you're having a stroke, your right side most likely is going to start having trouble. After that, it's S for speech. Someone having a stroke will often slur or struggle, or in my case, outright not be able to speak. And then T is for time to get help. Like, if any of those things, if enough of those things are happening, it is very likely a stroke. But I had no idea. I didn't know what was happening to me at all. But that's what I would definitely recommend. Be fast. So look at the balance.
I think what's important about that is, say if it had been me or my own girlfriend or something was going on, the first thought is, oh, well, I'll drive you home. Let's see what happens tomorrow.
And that's a mistake.
That was not an option with you.
No. Luckily, she knew right away. But I could see a lot of situations where somebody's like, hey, you're okay. Maybe it's sunstroke. Maybe it's something else. Like, whatever. But, like, it's important to recognize when you have to call for help. And when it comes to a stroke, part of the reason that I'm able to have this interview, have this conversation, to be able to respond and interact as I am now, it's because they got to me so quickly. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been. Yeah, so once I was there, they gave me the clot buster, and I remember it was really funny because I'm laying there. They didn't inject
it straight into your head, though, did they? It wasn't in the bloodstream?
No, it was right in my IV. And they did this thing where they walked up, and the nurse that was giving the injection was like, okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, why is there a countdown in my head? I'm like, why are they counting down? Is this scanners? Is my head going to blow up? What's happening? And then they gave me the injection, and then they kind of like looked at me for a minute, and then they stepped back, and I remember going, how long before, like, just like that? And they were like, they all turned and looked at me like shocked. And they're like, how long before it takes effect? Obviously pretty quick. And I was like, hey, I can talk. And they're like, what? Like, they seemed really shocked that I was able to respond. And I remember texting, I could look at my phone and I could open it immediately, and I was able to. I texted Valerie. I just wrote her, "I'm okay," even though I couldn't even quite talk yet. But like, as time went on, it got easier, and by the time she showed up, I was able to respond.
Right. But did you fear for your life at any point, or did you just have to be in the moment and try to process it?
I didn't think I was in any. It's so weird. I knew that something was wrong. And I knew that it was weird. I was not in pain, so I didn't think. I was like, I'm not hurting, so it should be okay. Like, there was no headache or anything. And I remember that this in the helicopter, when I couldn't remember my name, that was where I was like, okay, this is more serious than I think. And then when I was in the hospital after they gave me the clot buster, at one point the nurse gave me a cognitive test, of which the first of many, and I got it right. it's usually about, you describe a picture. They show you a picture, you have to describe it. They show you a number of items. You have to point them out and say what each of those things are. And it's literally like key, feather, chair, hammock, cactus, or car, hammock, cactus. And I got it. And and she was really happy. And just out of my eyesight, on the corner of my eye, I saw her make the sign of the cross behind me. And I was like, whoa, okay, she seems happy. And then when she took a break, what happens when you have a stroke, you get assigned a nurse because they have to watch you for 24 hours, especially if you have the clot buster, because you could have spontaneous cranium bleeding. So they test you every hour, or, at first every half hour, and then every hour they give you cognitive tests throughout the night. And that was a rough night because they wake you up to do it.
Right.
But the first nurse assigned to me, it was time for her break. So another nurse came in, and I was talking to them, and she was like, oh, and she was like, I think she thought that I had a mini stroke, and
not a second one. Oh, a little stroke in the hospital?
Like, you can have a mini stroke with just a partial blockage.
Right.
And because I was talking, and she was like, she was talking to me, and then she opened up my file, and then it's probably terrible that she did this. She was like, oh my God, do you realize how serious this was? You almost died. Like, this was a full stroke. And I was like, yes, and that's when I realized I would have died confused. I would have died thinking, like, what's going on? Like, I had no idea that it was that it was that serious. And like, since then I've talked to like neurologists and others who have told me, like, 10 years ago, we didn't have the techniques we have now. Everything we did for you didn't exist 10 years ago. I recovered really quickly. Even now, since then, I've been really lucky. But it's required a lot of patience. But luckily, like, even when I was in the hospital, they were asking, like, okay, he's an artist, he's a musician, is that going to be affected? And I remember the doctor going, oh, no, that's fine. That's a whole different part of the brain. You'll be able to play music and
you told me you could play your bass again within days of getting home.
Yeah, it was weird, though, that I could do that, but then I would struggle to talk if there was... Like, even now, I still run into problems if, like, people are talking really fast or there's a lot of people talking. It wears me out. But back then, I would get to the point where I was like, suddenly I couldn't understand what anyone was saying. And it sounded like another language.
Right.
I wasn't able to process. So what was damaged was my communication. My right side still feels different. It feels like it's weaker. But I took a lot of physical therapy tests, and It's just as strong as my left side. It's just that it's now there's a new pathway that controls my right side.
Right.
I struggle with words. The more tired I get, the more I struggle with things. If I still make mistakes. I make a lot more mistakes than I used to make in terms of like numbers or reading comprehension or writing. Grammar is worse. And then if I push too far, I get confused. And I could get really confused where I don't see or notice things around me and I'm not sure what's going on. It's been getting better, but it's definitely an interesting experience to go through. And so now it's basically, generally I'm okay, but I notice that when I get tired, I get real tired really fast.
Right.
And then I start, for lack of a better term, falling apart. But I've been really lucky because I've been able to play shows with Loudgraves and Tsunami Bomb. I've been able to draw. I'm able to work. It's a little tricky. Some things are a little harder than others, but it's definitely been an experience in patience and in acceptance of a new reality. Like I feel like, I think I told you once, I feel like I've gone from being able to juggle a lot of things to basically toss one ball up in the air and catch it. And I can do one thing at a time. And right. I try to be efficient, and I try to have a lot of as many checks and balances for myself. But I'm very grateful for how much I've come back as it is. I mean,
we all are, obviously, and I think I'm speaking for everybody out there too.
Well, I appreciate it. It really was amazing just how supportive everybody was and how kind everybody was. But it's definitely been an experience. So I would say, really pay attention to everyone out there. If you see something happening, do not be afraid to pull the alarm, because that's the difference between somebody recovering and someone not recovering.
Yeah.
And then, for the checks, it's like that be fast list is a really good balance.
Yeah.
Eyes, face, arms, speech, get some help. That's the things to look for. I guess I should say what ended up being the cause of this whole thing. It was determined that I have something that 20% of people have, which is a hole in my heart. You get that hole when you're a fetus in your mother's womb. It's part of how her blood goes from her body into yours before your heart is pumping your own blood, or you've developed completely your own blood. But as you're born and you grow up, that hole closes. Mine did not, and 20% of people doesn't. But it's enough for blood clots that go through my bloodstream and out to my lungs to be crushed by my lungs, which is what everybody is supposed to do. It's enough for that one to get through. So it was only a matter of time. And then added to that, I have one instance of factor V Leiden, which is a mutation that basically I clot at a higher rate than most people. And growing up, I've never been a bleeder. And looking back, that I realized that, like, I bleed, but like it tends to heal pretty quick, scab over. It's like I stopped bleeding pretty fast. It's always been easy to stop me from bleeding. Now, if I had a double instance of it, then I would seriously have a problem. But as one factor V Leiden, that's not so bad either. It's you're functional. You just clot at a higher rate. Together, this led to my clot. Eventually, a clot came by my heart, went up the hole, and shot right into my brain and clogged it. And they say it could have happened at any point in my life, but it happened now. But luckily, like I said, that's how it happened. So I did just about a month ago have a procedure to close the hole in the heart. So everything should be good.
What's the name of the procedure?
It was a PFO closure.
Okay.
That's what they call it.
And for those people who don't know, oh my God, heart surgery, and they think of open heart surgery.
Yeah, it wasn't an open heart surgery.
Cracking your ribs like an egg and ripping in there and cutting stuff open. And that's not what was done here.
No, they go through your groin. They go through your thigh right by your groin, which is that is weird from another perspective. But yes, they actually go through your veins all the way up, and they insert into your heart and then open up the closure, pull it down, it clamps down, and it closes it up. They can do it while you're awake.
They suture it closed, or they put in some kind of a stent or something.
It's like an umbrella stent. It kind of covers up over this opening. I thank you so much for having me on. It has been great hanging out, and it's been great chatting with you about everything. So thanks for having me.
Adios, amigos.